Welcome to our mini lecture on aspects of behavior. Today we're going to be talking about our relationship to our stuff. That is, what do our material possessions say about us? How do we relate to our material possessions? What are our issues related to what we do with our material possessions when we're not wanting to use them anymore? And some of the stuff related to environmental behaviors of keeping things versus throwing things away. So we're starting off first with a conversation about the theory of the meaning of material possessions. That is, what do things give for us or do for us psychologically? So what Dittmer is arguing here is that uh, consumption is more than just the thing, but what the thing represents and what the thing adds to our life in some ways. And so it has different sorts of functions and different sorts of aspects or psychological needs that it can fulfill. So when we think about our stuff, we need to think about its functional value, that is, what does it do? Experiential value, that is, what is it like to interact with this thing? Perceptions about luxury and what role that plays in our lives, as well as symbolic values and symbolic functions, both for adding meaning to ourselves in self-directed symbolism, as well as trying to create an image or impression in other people. So when we think about, we can really categorize into three different types of functions that things serve. So the first is the instrumental functions, not to mean literally instruments, right? But what does it do for us? What does this object allow us to accomplish? What is its purpose? Uh, so for example, you could have a book of a series of books on your shelf. Sometimes an instrumental function would be for reading and knowledge, but sometimes that's used as a decoration, right? And it serves as an aesthetic purpose or to keep space, right? To be a visual image. So we see a lot of people are decorating now with books that aren't necessarily designed to read, but are there for look, right? So it serves different sorts of instrumental functions. This could easily just be covers over boxes, and it would serve the same purpose. The second sort of function that we think about with our stuff is the symbolic function. That is, what does that thing represent? What does it signify? In some cases, it can help us categorize, right? It can show us our group membership and identify our group membership to other people. It could enable us to do social comparison when we compare our status of our group to the status of other groups. It could help us express ourselves in a self-expressive function of symbolism, right? It could show our attitudes or values or personality, our history, our memories, right? That our stuff at some level defines us or makes us unique and helps us show who we are. So this woman and her dog are communicating something, as is this gentleman, right? So we have Katy Perry here showing her sports fandom, but it's also a sequined dress and short. So it says different things about her value system and what she likes and how she expresses herself. So we have the instrumental function, the symbolic function. The third one is the affective or emotional function. How do our things make us feel? That's why we have advertisements that involve kids and puppies, right? That certain things evoke certain memories or emotions that they help us feel in a certain way. So how do you feel when you look at this picture of this happy child and the puppy? How do these things make you feel, right? Does that help you reminisce about your childhood at all? Do you have an emotional reaction, perhaps, to images of objects or toys that you had when you were younger? On Kansas Wesleyan's campus, we have this, right? The wishing well, which for some people is object, but it's not a very functional object because it doesn't actually hold water or do anything like that. But it holds, for those of you who know Kansas Wesleyan traditions, some meaning in terms of a place where people proposed. And so this particular postcard um, was available online. I like to go online every once in a while and just search Kansas Wesleyan to see what shows up on Amazon or eBay or whatever. This one is worth 17 bucks to somebody, right, for a postcard. So people would not be paying that much for a postcard of a object at a small liberal arts college unless it had some meaning to them. So when we think about what sorts of emotions are evoked from certain objects, I'm going to show you a few and see what you think. It could be an odd object that this is functional but yet artistic and might create an emotion. Some people are collectors, right? And so objects from their childhood help them feel in a certain way. Some people collect clothing, right? Or shoes, and use that to both express how they feel as well as help them react in a certain way. Or lots of cars, right? Or motorcycles, or movies or books, right? How do our things make us feel? And the recent tidying expert suggests that we touch everything and see if it evokes an emotion. If it doesn't, get rid of it, right? We want to keep the stuff that is meaningful to us in some way and not bother with clutter. So we have the issue of stuff providing us meaning, but we can also spend money on not just material goods, but experiential goods, right? That when you go on a vacation, part of it is the trip and the souvenirs, but part of it is the time and the things you see and the things you experience in life. Interestingly, when we look at the research on happiness, and we look at how you feel before and after spending money, it's an interesting sort of factor to say what role does or what satisfaction can you get from buying material things, souvenirs, versus experiential things, like an opportunity to skydive or something that you eat at a place that you've never eaten before. Something you wouldn't keep, but something you would experience in your life that would create a memory. Right? So when we're talking about environmental actions, those are also reflecting those sorts of functions. That is, our ownership of or use of or our methods of discarding of our stuff expresses instrumental, symbolic, and affective functions, right? So if you bike to work, that is expressing an environmental attitude that might have some instrumental functions in that you get to work, might have some symbolic functions because it signifies that you are an eco-sensitive person, perhaps, or maybe it reminds you of your childhood or something, makes you happy to feel the wind in your hair. So when we look at these sorts of functions, symbolic functions of, or symbolic motives for environmental behavior, right, is the need to express an identity or a categorization of being a green person, right, living that sort of purposeful environmental social identity or living up to some sort of environmental role. And so you can present yourself in different ways. And so parts of your stuff or lack of stuff can encourage or discourage other people from engaging in pro-environmental behavior, right? To what degree do you have an environmental identity? So you see this guy sitting out in the middle of his lawn, right? Or seeing that he's getting back to nature. You see somebody who has a house like this that makes use of light and design and natural building materials, right? Might say something about them. Somebody who drives a car like this says one thing. Somebody who drives a car like this says something else, right? So when we're thinking about our stuff and what we do with it, what it says about our status, about our uh, what's trendy, what's expensive, that other people see us having spent money and make assumptions about who we are or what we have. That we also need to be thinking about this reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Because everything that is made um, takes resources. And so the reduce, reuse, recycle says reducing it makes less of a market, so there's less waste. If we do produce it, then you might as well reuse it until it's not reusable anymore. And that's been decreasing generally over the last 50 to 80 years in our societies, reusing things. And if you can't reuse it, you recycle it so they could be used again and made into something else. But these are decreasing impact on the earth, right? So reducing consumption is sort of the first step and probably the best in terms of reducing energy and material use. Where reusing modifies it a little bit, recycling is better than just throwing it in the landfill. But all of these run against a society that might promote materialism, that sense of getting stuff, showing that you have stuff, says something about your success. And so this rat race, right? I need to work harder so that I can earn money, so that I can buy stuff, so that I can need more stuff, so that I can work harder and get more money. It's a never-ending cycle, right? Nobody ever has enough. No matter how much money you have, everybody wants more. And so one of the interesting things when this relates to materialism and eco behaviors is that sometimes environmental behaviors, green things or organic things, are more expensive. And so if you use organic, does that signal to other people that you're maybe more wealthy, may trigger some status kinds of attributions if green products are more expensive? So do you go shopping, for example, at a farmer's market? And what does that say about you and your values and your status? Or do you shop at an organic store, right? Those sorts of things will signify things both to yourself and to others. The other side to this is the affective side of things. How do we perceive risk? How do we perceive and deal with uncertainty, right? Because having stuff helps reduce some of those sorts of perceived risks or perceived uncertainties, which create anxiety and make us uncomfortable. And some people have argued that, in fact, emotions are more powerful than knowledge in guiding behaviors, particularly environmental behaviors. That it's not just enough to give people knowledge about why they should recycle or drive more fuel efficient cars or whatever, but that you have to affect them on an emotional level. If you think about, again, that reduce, reuse, recycling, reduction is ideal, right? Consume less. And if you can't reduce your intake, then reuse what you have, as opposed to just buy new, right? And we live in a society now that's easier to throw things away and buy new. It's cheaper to buy something than to reuse it or repurpose it or fix it. Right? You'd rather buy a new TV. It's cheaper to buy a new TV than to repair an old TV. And so the issue then becomes, what do we do with all that old stuff? How do we recover resources, chemicals, systems, right? If you throw away an old computer that's obsolete or an old phone or an appliance, what happens with those materials that have been used to make that? Because we could put it in the landfill, we could sort through it and reuse the resources. If we're not reusing all the substances, we might be able to use some of the more valuable substances in something. Or incineration is another option. We could use it and burn it, and so then we're burning stuff we have rather than fossil fuels, and so that could be reducing solid waste and putting it to good use too. So when we think about the emotions and how we relate to our stuff, we have to think about not just the emotions that we have with our things, but how we feel, or what anticipated emotions we have, our anticipated affect. Do we expect to feel good or bad from doing a particular behavior? What emotional outcomes do we think we will experience by doing something? So if we're trying to help people work the way up the pyramid, right, how do we encourage people to do the most preferred things? If you think about what we do, right, uh, based on some recent data, uh, burning stuff happens some of the time. Recycling happens about a third of the time, but we spend a lot of time throwing things away, which in high consumption areas like the United States, that's a lot of stuff. Here we see some more data related to recycling. Um, Kansas is not as high as some other areas and related to how much recycling occurs. So if you think about why do people not recycle, right? What is going on with their connection with their stuff that makes them either keep it or throw it away and buy new? A lot of times people say it's not convenient or it's not cost effective. Sometimes there's confusion about what's recyclable, what's not. Sometimes recycling is perceived as negative image, uh, those sorts of things. And so a lot of people struggle. They think they should recycle, but not sure where to recycle or what is recyclable and what's not. And the people who process the recycling then end up with contaminants of things that are not recyclable mixed in with the recyclable things, and that creates extra costs to sort through. So um, most often, if people don't know or don't care, they throw it away instead of recycling, rather than accidentally recycling something they shouldn't. A few people look it up, and a few people recycle it anyway, but most people will just choose to not recycle rather than do it wrong. Uh, and so when you think about what kinds of stuff gets recycled, both in terms of material stuff and in terms of things that go into our drinking water, for example, uh, we have lots of animals that are experiencing odd deformations because of things that we throw away that don't necessarily get filtered out in our water treatment system. Prescription drugs, for example, um, change hormone levels in fish, which change reproductive patterns and sex determination and those sorts of things, as well as we have uh, toxic chemicals. Flint, Michigan right now is a sort of classic example of that. So we have to somehow help people to do things that are effective, that help us um, eat naturally and consume healthfully and recycle effectively. Uh, so part of that is to make it fun, right? To encourage kids to do it, and if kids do it, parents do it. Uh, do something to make it easy, make it fun, because the alternative is that if people care about the environment but feel overwhelmed or depressed about the state of their ability to make a difference. All right, if you start thinking about all the different things that are potentially going wrong with our world, um, people get depressed or overwhelmed and see the problems as unsolvable, and that causes them to give up rather than do nothing, rather than to do something small that might collectively make a difference.